And to show this, you can see there are different status values, or kind of a life cycle that a service goes through. The service requirements are gathered, the service itself is defined, there's maybe some analysis, and once the service is approved, that's when it then is considered part of the service catalog, when that team is chartered to actually do the design work. So that the team is gathered. Now we've got a mandate to design, develop, build, test, and release the service into the operational environment. There are different ways that we have of recording services in a catalog. There's nothing in ITIL that indicates it has to be in a database format, but certainly that does make it easier for the organization. Something else to keep in mind is that there also can be different components of the service catalog, so that we may have different levels. For example, we may have the business catalog, meaning that things like email messaging or network or point of sale, or the different things that make sense, that the interaction that the business has with IT. What are the different components that the business uses? Then underneath that might be a technical service catalog. So that might consist of some of the supporting services like servers and networks and all of the things that really may not make much sense to the business, or may not, the business doesn't necessarily understand how everything works together. But these are the things that IT needs to track as far as services go on the technical side. So that portion of the catalog may not be visible to the business or to the end users, but it still needs to be maintained, and so that we can see the relationship between and among the services and the architecture. The technology and architecture is made up of systems. So you may have an information system, a business function may be considered a system. Underneath that is the architecture. So you may have different components. It's not just your network. It could also be any cloud servers, or a number of different components that make up the environment in which IT operates within the organization. Using these components and considerations, I mentioned before that the service design package is the output of the service design phase of the life cycle. So we have captured business requirements. We've developed a service design. It's also important, as I mentioned before, in addition to looking at the actual nuts and bolts of it, that we develop a plan. So we want to have readiness assessments. We want to be able to understand how the service is going to be supported, what needs to be provided to the service desk in case the service breaks, how is it fixed, how do we transition this to then the operational environment, what's the plan for testing and training, and eventual operational acceptance. Some additional processes that we need to consider in the service design phase of the lifecycle include service level management. So when we support this particular service, what are the service level agreements going to look like? There's two things I advise my customers to look at when they're trying to decide on how to develop their service level agreements. The first one is to understand your targets. So make sure you understand what your service level targets are before presenting any type of option to the business. And the second one is to understand the business needs before laying your cards on the table. So they may not have as strict of requirements as you might expect. So, some of the typical targets that you look at for within IT would include things like mean time to repair. So if something breaks, how long does it take to fix? It's important that you understand what your team's capabilities are first, and let the business come to you and tell you what their expectations are before making any commitments. Understand, too, that before you make any commitments, you need to understand what your operational level agreements and your underpinning contracts dictate. So if I need to have service restored within 8 hours for a level 2 severity issue, then I need to be sure that my Tier 2 and Tier 3 groups are providing me the response. And certainly I need to be sure that my suppliers or my contractors are providing a response that allow me to deliver that solution or that fix within 8 hours. So in talking about underpinning contracts, those are contracts that we might have with third-party suppliers or vendors. It's important here when we are designing a particular service that we understand what's the value that we're getting for the cost of services that a supplier might be providing to us. Additional processes here that we need to consider in the service design phase of the life cycle. I put these together on this slide because they're often discussed together, and these actually form what we understand as the concept of warranty. So warranty is made up of these 4 different considerations. So we need to understand, and I'll start with the lower row first. What's our capacity? Do we have appropriate levels of capacity? For example, we don't want to exceed capacity while we're in operation. If you look at something like a financial management system, you may not have that much activity on a particular financial application or service during the month, but on the last day of the month when you're closing the books, that capacity needs to be in place so that there's sufficient availability of the system for everybody who needs to do end-of-month reporting. So capacity and availability are closely aligned in that way. So you need to be sure that your services have adequate levels of capacity, whether that be hard drive space or bandwidth. You need to be sure that the appropriate levels of availability are there, again, according to the needs of the business. So it may only be Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. More and more businesses, however, are going to a 24/7 schedule. So we need to understand what are the times when we can have downtime and maintenance windows, and how do we measure the availability that we're providing to our customers. Security is critical. We need to be sure that we're providing appropriate levels of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So again, availability and security are very tightly aligned here. So are we keeping secret the information that needs to be kept secret? Are we providing access to the systems that we need to provide access to? And then finally, for the integrity of the data, are we sure that nobody is messing with our data, that nobody is corrupting our data? These 3, capacity, availability, and security, all underpin continuity. Continuity is how we recover if our systems go down. So it's not just kind of the daily monitoring, but continuity is related more closely to disaster recovery planning. So IT continuity needs to be part of an overall business continuity plan. So understanding, for example, when we're designing a service, is this a core service? Is it critical? Is it important? Is it useful? Those are common terms that we use to identify the urgency that needs to be associated with the support provided for a particular service. If it's one of our core applications, then it probably needs to be in a high availability environment. It needs to have failover. It needs to be redundant. If it's just a useful tool, then probably it doesn't need all of that infrastructure supporting it, but that's an important consideration. It's important to understand that for each of the services that are provided. So we've covered the processes. There are still some other additional principles or considerations for service design. We want to have good communication, again, with the business. So there's a concept here of business service management. We really want to be integrated with the business, so we may have a business analyst position that is focused on managing the relationship with the business. This concept also of service-oriented architecture, making sure that when we mentioned before that a service is defined as something that provides value, even though the customer is not expected to share the risks or the costs or all of the costs associated with the service. That's where we get into having services that are reusable or components that are reusable, that can be easily redeployed so that we're providing more value with less work. And then finally, service design models. One of the more common service design models nowadays is a cloud-first service design model. So it's what is the particular approach that the organization takes when considering the design of new or changing services. I mentioned before too, the output of all of this. So we've gone through the service strategy, we've gathered our requirements, we've passed them off and into the design phase, and then the output of the design phase then will be our service design package. So during the next webinar that we conduct, we will look at service transitions, so how a service moves from design and the design package and gets transitioned into the live environment. Just to recap all of this, we've started with those first two. We'll move into transition, operation, and then continual service improvement. There's a lot of other information out there. The complementary guidance I mentioned. There are also a number of resources, the books themselves, as well as some additional concepts here, some web resources that can provide thought leadership for this topic.